My son, Ryan, pushed a set of mortgage documents toward me, and as he told me that I had saved enough and it was time for me to help them, I felt like I was looking at a complete stranger. My refusal angered his wife, Sarah, so much that they ended up suing me. They were convinced I was a naive old man, but they didn't know I wasn't someone who could be so easily fooled. You'll be amazed by what happened next. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips as Ryan slid the papers for a $400,000 mortgage across my kitchen table. The number felt like a slap in the face. Ryan's voice was cold and detached as he told me I had saved enough and that it was time to help them. Sarah didn't even bother to look up from her phone as she scrolled through pictures of granite countertops and marble bathrooms. I heard her say to him that the master suite had 3 walk-in closets and was perfect for starting their family. Her smile, when she finally looked at me, was as sharp as broken glass. I calmly set my coffee down and asked them what exactly they wanted me to do. Ryan tapped the papers and said he needed me to sign. He wanted my good credit score to get the house they had always dreamed of. I was stunned by their nerve. I had raised this boy and taught him the value of hard work, but now he sat in my kitchen, a kitchen I'd paid for with a plumber's salary, demanding that I risk everything I had ever saved. He looked away from me and asked what a 65-year-old man needed with all that money anyway. Sarah leaned in and, in a voice dripping with false kindness, said that family helps family. She explained that it's what grandparents do, investing in their children's future. I slowly repeated the word grandparents to her. She just waved her hand dismissively and said it would happen eventually, after they got settled in their new house. I flipped through the mortgage application and saw their combined income. Ryan made decent money as an IT specialist, but Sarah only worked part-time at a boutique and seemed to spend more than she earned on clothes and spa treatments. Together, they made enough for a nice home, just not one this expensive. I pointed to the income section and noted that they made $73,000 a year together. I asked them what bank would approve a $4,200 monthly mortgage payment. Ryan's Adam's apple bobbed. He told me not to get caught up in the details. Details mattered to me. I slid the papers back across the table and told them the answer was no. A tense silence filled the room. Sarah's phone clattered onto the table as she angrily said, "Excuse me?" All the pretense of sweetness in her voice was gone. I told her I would not co-sign for a house they could not afford. Ryan's face turned red as he asked if I was serious after everything they had done. My question came out sharper than I had intended, as I asked them just what they had done for me. I was beyond caring about hurting their feelings. Sarah stood up so quickly that her chair scraped across the linoleum floor. She claimed that they had visited and included me in their lives, unlike some other people's kids who didn't care about having a relationship with their parents. I told her that visiting wasn't currency. She snapped back, saying she knew where we stood. She started to fake cry and said that she should have known I would choose money over my son's happiness. Ryan finally looked at me. My heart ached at the resentment and entitlement I saw in his eyes. The boy who had helped me fix my neighbor's leaky faucets was gone, replaced by a stranger who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with legs. He quietly said that I owed them this. Those words hit me harder than a punch. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made for him. Sarah grabbed her purse with sharp, angry movements and asked what sacrifices I was talking about. She told Ryan they were wasting their time and they should leave. Ryan hesitated for a moment, looking between his wife and me. I hoped some part of the son I had raised would show through, but instead, he picked up the papers with shaking hands and told me I would regret this. As Sarah paused at the door, she turned back with a venomous glare and said that I shouldn't expect them to pretend they wanted me around when I clearly didn't give a damn about their future. The door slammed behind them, rattling the windows. I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the empty space where the papers had been. My coffee had a thin skin on top and was cold. The house felt different, somehow smaller and emptier. I had lost my son that day, not to death or distance, but to his greed and sense of entitlement. Standing up slowly, I went into my study and pulled a small notebook out of a desk drawer. My phone was already ringing when I opened the notebook. Ryan's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail and then watched as it immediately started ringing again. On the 4th call, I answered. I heard his disbelief as he asked if that was all I had to say, and if I had any idea what I had just done. I heard Sarah in the background whispering to him to tell me about the inspection deadline and that they would lose the house. Ryan's voice was desperate as he said they had 48 hours to secure financing or they would lose their $25,000 deposit because I was being selfish. I simply said that I was being realistic. He laughed bitterly and told me I had 6 figures in my retirement accounts that I would never spend and that they were talking about their future. The phone rustled and Sarah's voice came on, sounding wounded and fragile. She apologized for Ryan's emotions and said that it was a very difficult time for them. She said they had dreamed about this house for months and had planned their whole future around it. I told them they should have planned better. She then asked why I hated her so much. The fake tears were back in her voice as she claimed that she loved my son and wanted to give him the life he deserved. I told her it wasn't my responsibility. She said it was an investment in their family's future and their grandchildren's future. I wrote down the time and date in my notebook, then started transcribing their words as they spoke. I quietly noted that those grandchildren didn't even exist yet. Ryan took the phone back and told me to listen to him. He promised they would pay me back with interest. I asked them with what money since they could barely afford their current rent. He claimed their salaries would increase, and I asked him if that was guaranteed. The silence lasted for several seconds. Sarah then grabbed the phone and said she was done being nice. She claimed that Ryan was too good to say it, but she wasn't. She told me I was a selfish old man who was going to die alone with all the money I was hoarding and that I shouldn't expect them to come running when I needed them. The line went dead. I wrote down her exact words and checked my voicemail. There were 3 messages, each more desperate than the last. I transcribed those, too, noting the timestamps. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan asking me to please reconsider and saying that the house meant everything to them. 2 minutes later, I got another one that said he would do anything. Then I received a text from Sarah, who said she was just upset and had said things she hadn't meant. She asked if they could start over and said that Ryan was crying and that I was breaking my son's heart. I also received a text that said, "Fine, be that way, but don't come crying to us when you realize what you've lost." I took a screenshot of each message and created a digital folder on my computer labeled Evidence. My phone rang again, and this time, it was my sister, Susan. She asked what was going on. She said Ryan had called her, sobbing, saying that I had refused to help them buy a house. I told her she was right. She asked why, saying that they were young and needed help getting started. I asked her if he had told her it was a $400,000 house. She paused and said he had only told her it was their dream home. I asked her if he had told her that I would be co-signing a mortgage that was more than their annual income. After a longer pause, she said no. I also asked if he had explained that they had been living paycheck to paycheck despite making decent money. She told me I didn't have to be so harsh. I hung up and added her call to my log. Within an hour, my brother Mark called, then my neighbor Mrs. Miller, then Ryan's old high school friend, Tom. They all told the same story, that Ryan and Sarah were devastated and couldn't understand why their dad was being so cruel. I added each call to the log. My phone constantly buzzed through dinner, with text messages from Ryan filled with guilt trips and messages from Sarah filled with manipulation. One said that they had looked at cheaper houses, but they were all in bad neighborhoods. Sarah's text said that Ryan hadn't eaten all day and was making himself sick over this. Another text said that I was choosing money over my own son and asked how that felt. Another message pleaded with me, promising they would never ask for anything else, saying that this was it. One text made me pause. Sarah said she was pregnant. I called Ryan immediately. He told me that Sarah said she might be pregnant, but they hadn't been to the doctor yet. I asked him if she was pregnant or not, and he said it was complicated. I told him it was simple, yes or no, and he hung up. 30 seconds later, a text from Sarah arrived. She said it was a false alarm about the pregnancy and that stress sometimes made her late. I added that to the file, highlighting it in red. By 10 p.m., I had received 47 text messages and 12 voicemails. Each one was more desperate, more accusatory, or more manipulative than the last. They had called everyone in my contact list, painting me as a stingy old man who cared more about money than family. But in doing so, they had also revealed their true selves in ways they didn't realize. The entitlement, the manipulation, and the lies were all documented now. I turned off my phone, looked at my notebook filled with their own words, and closed it. I hoped that tomorrow would bring more of the same, but that night, I just needed some sleep. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the boy Ryan used to be. The quiet house gave me space to think, to trace the path from that eager kid to the stranger who had just demanded my life savings. I remembered when Ryan was 10, standing on a milk crate in my workshop, his tongue poking out in concentration as he learned to use a socket wrench. He had asked me to show him again how to tell if it was tight enough, and his small hands, so serious and careful, would mimic my movements. I also remembered him at 18, on his graduation day. He was the valedictorian of his high school class and had a full scholarship to the State University for computer science. I sat in that auditorium, bursting with pride as he gave a speech about hard work and perseverance. He had looked right at me and said that his father had taught him that anything worth having was worth working for. When he was 22, he called me after his first job interview, his voice shaking with excitement. He had told me that they had offered him $55,000 to start, and that he couldn't believe he would actually make more than I ever did. There was no malice in his words, just joy and amazement. Back then, he understood the value of an earned dollar. The change started slowly after he met Sarah at a work conference in Chicago. She was the opposite of him, confident, flashy, and demanding. Within a few months, he was driving a leased BMW he couldn't afford, wearing expensive clothes, and dining at restaurants that cost more than I would spend on groceries in a month. When I expressed concern about his spending, he told me that I had to live a little and that life was too short to pinch pennies forever. But it wasn't living, it was a performance. Sarah had expensive tastes and expected him to keep up. When his salary couldn't cover her expectations, the requests began. The first time, he asked for help with his rent and for a few $100s because a car repair had wiped out his budget. I gave it to him gladly, remembering my own tight months as a young man. Then it was for car payments. As the BMW's lease payment went up, he asked me to give him some money until he got his Christmas bonus. Then it was credit card debt. He said that Sarah was having some medical issues and the insurance didn't cover everything, so they just needed some money to get them through. Each time, I helped. Each time, Ryan promised it was only temporary. Each time, Sarah had a new story about unexpected expenses, Ryan's job not paying enough, or some other temporary setbacks that somehow became permanent patterns. I tried to give him advice instead of money. I suggested that maybe he should look for a cheaper apartment. His immediate irritation was obvious. He told me he didn't need lectures. He needed help. I once suggested that they take budgeting classes. Sarah had actually laughed and said that they weren't living in the 1950s and that people their age didn't sit around counting pennies. But those pennies mattered. I had learned that lesson the hard way. I worked 60-hour weeks for 30 years, fixing other people's pipes and water heaters, and saving every dollar I could. I had wanted Ryan to understand that money represented my time, my labor, and my life. Instead, he saw it as something that appeared magically, something he was entitled to because we were family. The wedding was a turning point that I should have recognized sooner. Sarah wanted everything perfect, a designer dress, an expensive venue, and an open bar for 200 guests. Ryan asked me to pay for the photographer, then the flowers, and finally, the honeymoon when their credit cards were maxed out. He pleaded that it was a once-in-a-lifetime event and they couldn't skimp on their wedding. I ended up paying $15,000 for one day of celebrating two people who hadn't saved a dime for their own future. I watched as Sarah directed the photographer like a movie star, demanding shot after shot until the man looked ready to collapse from exhaustion. 2 weeks later, they called me from Hawaii in a panic. Their hotel bill was higher than expected, their rental car had been damaged, and they needed money for the flight home. Another $3,000. He promised me it was the last time, but of course it wasn't. The requests continued, each with a new crisis, a new justification, and a new promise that this would be the end of it. I had enabled their irresponsibility, thinking I was helping my son when I was really creating a monster. Ryan had learned that his dad would always come through, always open his wallet, and always choose family over financial sense. Now, they wanted $400,000. They didn't see it as a loan because they had never actually repaid anything they had borrowed. They saw it as a gift wrapped in the pretty paper of family obligation. The boy who had learned to use tools in my workshop had become a man who saw me as nothing more than a tool myself, a means to an end to get what he wanted without earning it. I got up from bed with a new determination and walked back to my study. The notebook was open on the desk, filled with documentation of their harassment campaign. I picked up my pen and started a new section, pattern of behavior, historical context. If they wanted to play hardball, they had just learned that this old plumber knew how to fight back. Dawn was breaking through my study windows when I opened the notebook with fresh determination. 40 years of fixing problems had taught me that the best way to stop a leak was to trace it to its source and shut off the supply. It was time to turn off Ryan and Sarah's access to my money permanently. First, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I called First National Bank, which Ryan had mentioned was where he had applied for the mortgage. I told the loan officer, Jane Harrison, that I was Ryan's potential co-signer and wanted to understand the terms. She was helpful and thorough. She said that Ryan and Sarah seemed like lovely people, but the loan was aggressive given their debt-to-income ratio. I asked her what kind of debt she was talking about. I heard papers rustle on her end. She said that they had about $47,000 in credit card debt and that their monthly obligations from car loans and student loans were already at 38% of their gross income before adding this new mortgage. $47,000 in credit card debt. They had claimed to be financially responsible and just needed help with this one purchase. I wrote down every detail Jane shared. Next, I pulled up Ryan's social media. It's amazing what people reveal when they think only their friends are watching. Last month, there were photos from a weekend in Las Vegas. 3 weeks ago, there were pictures of Sarah's girls' trip to Miami, complete with first-class flight photos and shots of their 5-star hotel room. 2 weeks ago, I saw pictures of Ryan's new gaming setup that was easily worth $3,000 in equipment. But according to them, they couldn't afford groceries without my help. I took a screenshot of everything, creating a timeline of their expensive purchases versus their claims of poverty. The evidence was damning. 2 people were living far beyond their means, using credit cards to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford, then expecting me to bankroll their next financial fantasy. At 10 a.m., I called Morrison & Associates, the law firm that had handled my estate planning. Elizabeth Morgan had helped me set up my will and retirement accounts and knew exactly what I had to protect. I told her the situation carefully, leaving out the emotional details and focusing on the facts. Elizabeth listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification about Ryan's demands and threats. When I finished, she told me she wanted to make sure she understood everything. She said that my son and his wife wanted me to co-sign a mortgage that would obligate me to a $400,000 debt despite their existing debt and inability to afford the payments on their own. She also clarified that when I refused, they began a campaign of harassment and manipulation, claiming I owed them this assistance. She told me to document everything and that if this escalated legally, I would need proof of their behavior. I told her that I had already started. I flipped through my notebook and told her I had yesterday's conversations transcribed, screenshots of text messages, and a record of everyone they had called to pressure me. She said that was excellent. She then explained my legal position. She told me that oral promises meant nothing without proof, that children had no legal claim to their parents' money, and that co-signing a loan made me fully responsible for the debt if Ryan defaulted. The most important thing, she said, was to get them to admit their true motivations on record. If they were claiming this was about family obligation rather than business, I needed to let them say so. If they were threatening to cut off contact unless I paid, I needed to document that, too. I asked her how I would get them on record. She said that Minnesota was a one-party consent state for recording, which meant I could record without telling them as long as I was a part of the conversation. I set up a recording app on my phone before my next conversation with Ryan. He called me at noon, right on schedule. I hit record. He said he had been thinking about yesterday, that he was upset, and had said things the wrong way. I asked what things. He said that when he had told me I owed them, it had come out wrong. He explained that family helps family. I then asked him if he didn't think I owed him anything. He started to say that I had all this money just sitting there, that they were my only family, and that he didn't know who else it would go to. When I asked him if it could go to charity, I heard a sharp intake of breath. He then said, "Charity? You would give our inheritance to strangers?" I calmly said, "Your inheritance? I am very much alive." He said that wasn't what he meant. I heard Sarah's voice in the background telling him to tell me about the house and that they needed an answer today. Ryan told me they needed to know by 5 p.m. because the sellers wouldn't wait. I said that maybe they should find financing they could actually afford. He insisted they could afford it and only needed me to co-sign because his credit score had taken a hit when Sarah was out of work last year. I asked him when she had been out of work. He paused for a few months and then said that wasn't the point. I asked him what the point was. He said that the point was that parents help their children, and that's what families do, even if it means risking their financial security. I told him he knew that wasn't true. He said that they would make every payment. I then asked with what money and told him that Jane Harrison said they were already carrying $47,000 in credit card debt. There was a dead silence. I heard Sarah say that I had called the bank and that she knew I would. Ryan said that I was investigating them, my own son. I told him I was protecting myself from a bad financial decision and that this was unbelievable. I said, "I'm your son," and the line went dead. Yes, he was my son, and I had raised him better than this. The call ended with him hanging up on me. I stopped the recording and saved it to my evidence file, labeling it, "Ryan admits expectation of inheritance, confirms credit issues." My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. She said that she and Ryan knew what I was doing and that I wouldn't get away with it. I took a screenshot of that, too, and then texted back, "Get away with what? Protecting my retirement savings?" Her response was immediate. She said I was stealing their future and that Ryan deserved that money more than some random charity. I took a screenshot of that message as well, considering it another piece of evidence showing their true motivation. By the evening, I had 18 recorded conversations, 43 text messages, and a comprehensive financial profile of Ryan and Sarah's situation. They weren't just financially irresponsible, they were completely delusional about money, believing they deserved anything they wanted simply because they wanted it. As I sat in my study, reviewing the growing file of evidence, I felt a sense of control I hadn't felt since yesterday morning. They thought I was a confused old man who could be bullied into submission. My phone buzzed with another demanding text from Sarah, but this time, I smiled as I took a screenshot of it. It was another piece of evidence for the growing pile, because the real battle was just beginning. My phone rang at 7 a.m., sharp. My stomach tightened when I saw my sister Susan's name on the screen. She never called that early unless something was wrong. Her voice had that careful tone she used when discussing family problems. I had heard it during Dad's final illness, Mom's funeral arrangements, and my own divorce 20 years ago. I told her I was awake and asked what was going on. She said she had received a call from Ryan last night and that he was very upset. I bet he was. She said that he had told her I was refusing to help them buy a house and that I had all this money sitting around and wouldn't lift a finger for my own son. She paused and said that didn't sound like me. I asked her if he had mentioned it was a $400,000 house or that he wanted me to co-sign for a mortgage they couldn't afford. A long silence stretched between us. When Susan spoke again, her voice was softer. She said he had called it their dream home and that I could easily afford to help, but chose not to. I told her that they made good money, but they had just spent every penny on expensive toys and trips. I asked her why I should risk my retirement so they could keep living beyond their means. She said that he was my son, and I replied that he was and that I had raised him to be responsible, but apparently, that lesson hadn't stuck. After we hung up, I knew it was just the beginning. By noon, I had gotten calls from my brother Mark, my cousin Jane, and 3 family friends, all with the same story. Ryan and Sarah were devastated and couldn't understand why I was being so heartless. But it was on social media where they really went to work. I didn't have Facebook, but my neighbor Mrs. Miller showed me Sarah's post when I ran into her at the mailbox. Her screen displayed a long, emotional post about family betrayal and the selfishness of the elderly. Sarah had written about their struggling young family being abandoned by Ryan's wealthy father who refused to share his blessings. The comments were brutal. People I had known for decades called me greedy and heartless. Some of the comments said that some parents forget what family means and that money can't buy you love, but apparently, it can buy you isolation. Mrs. Miller looked uncomfortable and said she didn't understand what was happening. Her confusion was genuine. She asked me if Ryan drove that nice BMW and if they had just gotten back from Hawaii. That afternoon, I went to Murphy's Hardware for light bulbs. Tom Murphy, who had been giving me deals for 15 years, barely looked up when I walked in. The usual friendly chat was replaced by a cold efficiency. At the grocery store, Linda, the cashier who always asked about Ryan and his beautiful wife, rang up my items without a single word. When I tried to make conversation, she gave me a look that could freeze water. The whispers followed me everywhere. Conversations at the coffee shop stopped when I approached. Former friends suddenly found their shoes fascinating when we passed each other on the sidewalk. The whole town was hearing only one side of the story, and that side painted me as a stingy old man hoarding wealth while his desperate children suffered. My phone buzzed constantly with screenshots from well-meaning relatives. Ryan had shared a photo of himself looking haggard and defeated with a caption about when your own father chooses money over family. Sarah posted pictures of modest apartments with comments about having to settle for less because some people value dollars over their own blood. But they made a critical error. Their story was too perfect and too coordinated. I started documenting everything. I took screenshots, saved posts, and recorded voicemails from confused family members. Each piece of evidence showed the same pattern of emotional manipulation designed to pressure me into submission. When Ryan's high school friend, Tom, called to lecture me about family loyalty, I asked him a simple question. I asked him if he thought it was reasonable for a parent to risk their entire retirement to co-sign a mortgage their child couldn't afford. There was a long pause. He said that when I put it that way, he guessed not. I told him that was exactly what Ryan had asked me to do, a $400,000 mortgage for a house he couldn't make payments on. Tom said that Ryan had told him I had plenty of money. I told him I had enough for my retirement, but not enough to bail out someone else's poor decisions. By evening, my documentation folder had grown substantially. Every social media post, every guilt-tripping message, and every manipulative photo showed a clear pattern of calculated emotional warfare. I was sitting at my computer, organizing the evidence, when the certified letter arrived. The return address made my blood run cold. It was from Brennan Walsh and Associates, attorneys at law. I signed for the envelope with steady hands, but my heart was pounding as I walked back to my kitchen table. The letter lay unopened in front of me while I researched the law firm on my computer. Brennan Walsh and Associates specialized in elder financial rights and family financial disputes. Their website featured testimonials from adult children who had successfully sued elderly parents for promised financial support. My stomach dropped. Ryan and Sarah hadn't chosen this firm randomly. They had found lawyers who specialized in exactly what they were planning to do to me. I opened the letter with deliberate care. The formal language couldn't disguise the threat. It was a demand for a meeting regarding financial obligations and family support commitments. They wanted me to come to their office to resolve the matter amicably before formal proceedings became necessary. I set the letter aside and opened my laptop. It was time to understand exactly what I was dealing with. My first stop was Ryan's social media profiles. It was amazing what people revealed when they thought only their friends are watching. I scrolled through months of posts, taking screenshots of everything. In February, Ryan had upgraded his gaming setup, which was easily worth $4,000. In March, Sarah had a spa weekend with first-class flights and photos of their five-star resort. Their Valentine's Day dinner was at the most expensive restaurant in Minneapolis, complete with champagne and photos of $100 steaks. But 3 weeks ago, Ryan had posted about struggling to make ends meet and hoping his family would help them get ahead. Next, I called their apartment complex. I told the manager that I was Ryan's father and was thinking of helping him with his rent, but I wanted to understand his payment history. The manager, probably thinking I was a generous father, was helpful. She said that Ryan had been late on rent 4 times this year and was currently 2 months behind, but they were working with them. They were 2 months behind on rent, but they had just taken a weekend trip to Las Vegas last month. Their spending priorities were crystal clear. I dug deeper into public records. Ryan's car lease payments were $847 monthly for a BMW he didn't need. Sarah's credit card statements, visible through their shared financial planning app they had foolishly made public, showed monthly charges at high-end boutiques, expensive restaurants, and premium gym memberships. Their combined annual income was $73,000, but their visible spending exceeded $85,000. They were living on credit, hoping I would bail them out when it all collapsed. But the most revealing discovery came from Ryan's college friend, Mark, who called me directly. He told me that he felt weird about it, but Ryan had asked him for money last month. He said that Ryan had told him his dad was being unreasonable about helping with the bills. I asked him how much he had asked for. Mark said $3,000, and he had used the same story about a temporary setback and promised he would pay him back soon. He said that this was the 3rd time in 2 years this had happened. I wrote down every detail. Ryan and Sarah weren't just targeting me. They were working everyone they knew, spreading the same lies and playing the same victim card. By evening, I had a comprehensive picture of their financial manipulation. They had borrowed money from at least 6 people in the past year, always with sob stories about temporary hardship, but they had never paid anyone back. They had maxed out credit cards to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford and then expected others to fund their irresponsibility. I called Elizabeth Morgan to update her on the situation. She said that this was worse than family pressure and that they were preparing to sue me. I asked her for what, since I had never promised them anything. She said they would claim I had made oral agreements to help with major purchases and that in Minnesota, that could theoretically be enforceable if they could prove it. I told her I hadn't promised anything. She said she believed me, but they would try to find witnesses and create a narrative of implied promises, maybe even claim I was suffering from age-related confusion. The strategy became clear. They would attack my credibility, claiming I had made promises I couldn't remember and painting me as a confused elderly man who had gone back on his word. The elder financial abuse specialist would know exactly how to frame their case. I asked her what I should do. She told me to document everything, to legally record every conversation, and to get witnesses to my actual statements. She also told me to start thinking about this as a war because they were no longer interested in family reconciliation. I hung up and stared at my growing evidence file. Dozens of screenshots, recorded conversations, financial records, and witness statements from people they had tried to manipulate. They wanted to play legal hardball with a man who had spent 40 years solving problems methodically. They had no idea what they had started. My phone rang, and Ryan's name flashed on the screen. I hit record and answered. I heard him say that they needed to talk and asked if I could come to the law office tomorrow at 2 so they could work it out. I asked him what exactly we were working out. He said the money I owed them and the promises I had made about helping family. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about and told him to tell me exactly what I had promised and when. I heard Sarah's voice in the background telling him I was trying to trick him and not to answer that question. Ryan's voice returned, shakier now. He just told me to come to the meeting tomorrow at 2. I said I would be there. After I hung up, I saved the recording and added it to my evidence folder. Ryan couldn't specify a single promise because no promises had ever been made. The next morning brought another certified letter. This one wasn't a request for a meeting. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. I sat at my kitchen table, in the same spot where Ryan had first made his demands 3 weeks ago, and carefully opened the certified mail. It was a complaint for damages from Ryan and Sarah against me. They were demanding $400,000 plus costs and attorney fees. My hand stayed steady as I read each accusation, but my anger grew with every word. They were claiming I had made repeated oral promises to help with their major purchases, that I had created reasonable expectations of financial support through my words and actions, and that my sudden refusal constituted a breach of contract and had caused them severe emotional and financial distress. The most outrageous claim came near the end. They were alleging that I was suffering from age-related cognitive decline that made me forget promises made to family members and that I required court intervention to protect all parties involved. I set the papers down and called Elizabeth Morgan immediately. They had filed a lawsuit for $400,000. She said she was afraid of that and asked if I could come in that morning so we could discuss our strategy. An hour later, I sat in her office with the lawsuit spread across her conference table. She said that this was aggressive and that they were using every tactic available. She mentioned a breach of oral contract, promissory estoppel, and even hinting at elder abuse. I couldn't believe they were accusing me of elder abuse when they were the ones trying to steal my retirement. She said that was the irony, but they had chosen their strategy carefully. She said they would claim that I had made promises when witnesses were present, that I had encouraged their house hunting, and that my sudden refusal proved I was having cognitive issues. I asked her what witnesses, as I had never promised them anything. Elizabeth pulled out a yellow pad. She said we should go through this systematically and asked if I had ever said anything that could be interpreted as a commitment to help financially. I thought carefully. I had said that family should help each other, but I meant emotional support, advice, and just being there for each other. I also said that other people were sometimes present. At Ryan's birthday dinner last year, I made a toast about families sticking together. At Christmas, I said I wanted them to be happy and successful. She said they would twist those statements and make them sound like financial commitments. The scope of their planning became clear. They had been building this case for months, maybe years. Every family gathering, every casual conversation, and every expression of love for my son had been cataloged as potential evidence of financial promises. I told Elizabeth that they had borrowed money from half a dozen people with sob stories about needing help, that they were 2 months behind on rent, but had just taken a vacation to Vegas, and that their social media showed luxury, spending while they claimed poverty. Her eyes lit up. She said that was our defense. We would prove they had a pattern of financial manipulation and false claims. She said my documentation would become crucial evidence of their dishonesty. We spent 2 hours planning our response. We would file counterclaims for defamation, harassment, and abuse of process. We would also file for discovery requests for their complete financial records, social media accounts, and correspondence with other people they had borrowed money from. She told me that this would get expensive and ugly, and that they were betting I would settle rather than fight. I thought about the boy Ryan used to be, helping me in the workshop, proud of honest work. Then I thought about the entitled stranger who had demanded my life savings and was now trying to steal it through the courts. I said that I wasn't settling and that I wanted everyone to know exactly what kind of people they were. She replied that we would fight completely, with full discovery, character witnesses, and financial analysis. We would expose their pattern of manipulation and prove that no promises had ever been made. I signed the papers to formally respond and file counterclaims. The legal fees would be substantial, but my integrity was worth more than money. I told Elizabeth that I wanted to make sure the truth came out publicly and that I wanted their friends, family, and everyone to see the evidence of what they had done. She said that we would file everything in public court records, including their financial irresponsibility, their lies, and their attempts to manipulate me, and it would all be documented. As I handed the signed papers back to her, I felt a sense of complete clarity about the fight ahead. They thought they could terrorize an old man into submission. They had no idea they had just declared war on someone who had spent a lifetime solving problems methodically, completely, and permanently. The gloves were coming off. Leaving Elizabeth's office, I drove to Murphy's Diner, where I had been having coffee for 20 years. It was time to face the community with my head held high and the truth in my hands. The waitress, Sarah, who had been cold to me recently, seemed uncertain when I walked in. She had clearly heard Ryan and Sarah's version, but was too polite to be outright rude to a longtime customer. She asked if I wanted coffee, and I said please. I then asked her if I could show her something. I pulled out copies of Ryan's social media posts, the Vegas vacation photos, the expensive gaming setup, and the luxury dinners, along with his claims of poverty and need. Sarah's expression shifted as she looked at the timeline. She said, "Wait, he posted about struggling to pay rent the same week he was in Vegas?" I said, "That's right." I then showed her the apartment manager's statement about being 2 months behind on payments. Her face hardened. She said she owed me an apology and that when Sarah came in crying about how I wouldn't help family, she had felt terrible for her. But she gestured at the evidence and said that this was different. Word spread quickly in a small community. By afternoon, I had shown the documented evidence to Tom Murphy at the hardware store, Father McKenna at St. Mary's, and Helen the librarian. Each conversation was calm, factual, and devastating to Ryan and Sarah's narrative. I told each person that I didn't gossip, but I thought they should see the actual facts. The beauty of the truth is its consistency. Ryan and Sarah's story had emotional appeal, but it fell apart under scrutiny. My evidence told a clear, documented story that aligned with what people were beginning to notice themselves. Mrs. Miller stopped me at the mailbox that evening. She said that she had been thinking about what we had discussed, and that Ryan drove a nicer car than her husband, and they were both still working. She asked how they were exactly struggling. I told her that was a good question, and that she should ask Sarah next time she posted about their poverty on Facebook. The social media backfire was spectacular. Sarah's emotional posts about family betrayal had initially gained sympathy, but people started fact-checking. Comments began appearing under her poverty claims, asking if she wasn't just in Miami last month. One comment said that Ryan drove a nice BMW for someone who couldn't afford a house. Another comment said that I had been nothing but generous to this community and that something didn't add up. Sarah tried to double down with increasingly dramatic posts about elderly selfishness and broken promises, but her over-the-top victim narrative began to work against her. People recognized manipulation when they saw it clearly. The grocery store provided the most satisfying validation. Linda, the cashier who had been giving me the cold shoulder, pulled me aside during checkout. She said she felt terrible about how she had treated me. She said that after seeing the Facebook post side by side with Ryan's vacation photos, she had opened her eyes and now knew the truth. I told her no harm was done and that people were given incomplete information. She then said that her daughter had pointed out that Ryan's gaming computer cost more than she made in 2 months, and he was claiming he couldn't afford groceries. The isolation Ryan and Sarah had tried to impose on me was reversing rapidly. Former supporters started distancing themselves and asking uncomfortable questions about the discrepancies between their claims and their lifestyle. I ran into Ryan's former boss at the gas station. He told me that Ryan had stopped by asking for money last week and said that his father was being unreasonable about a small loan. He said the lawsuit papers were public record now and that $400,000 wasn't exactly small. I told him no, it wasn't, and it made me wonder what else in that conversation wasn't exactly truthful. The beauty of my approach was its restraint. I never attacked Ryan and Sarah personally, never called them liars or thieves. I simply presented documented facts and let people draw their own conclusions. The evidence spoke louder than any emotional appeal. By the end of the week, the shift in community opinion was dramatic. People who'd initially sympathized with the struggling young couple were now questioning everything they've been told. Ryan and Sarah's support network wasn't just eroding, it was actively turning against them. My phone rang at 8 p.m. Ryan's name on the screen, but his voice was shaky when I answered. Dad, can we meet somewhere private? Just the two of us? The confidence was gone. The entitled demands had been replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. What did you have in mind? Maybe coffee corner tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. I think we need to work something out. I smiled, knowing he couldn't see it. The lawsuit had been filed. The community had seen the evidence, and their house of lies was collapsing around them. I'll be there, Ryan. The boy who thought he could intimidate his father with lawyers and social pressure was about to learn that truth has a way of winning in the end. Ryan's voice barely sounded like my son anymore. The confident entitlement had cracked, replaced by something that sounded dangerously close to panic. Coffee corner, Dad. 10 a.m., please. I sat in my study, noting how he dropped the demands and threats. I'll be there, Ryan. But when I arrived at the small cafe the next morning, Ryan was nowhere to be seen. Instead, he'd chosen Riverside Park, the same place I'd taught him to ride a bike 25 years ago. He sat hunched on a bench, looking older than his 35 years. Dad. He stood up quickly, nervously. Thanks for coming. The expensive clothes were still there, but they couldn't hide the stress lines around his eyes or the way his hands shook slightly when he gestured. This wasn't the arrogant young man who demanded my retirement savings 3 weeks ago. You look tired, Ryan. Yeah, well. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Things have been complicated lately. We sat on opposite ends of the bench where I'd once pushed him on swings. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dad, I think this whole thing has gotten out of hand. I waited. Let him talk. The lawsuit, the lawyers, all this drama. Maybe we can work something out. You know, just between us. What kind of workout? Ryan's Adam's apple bobbed. If we drop the lawsuit, maybe you could help us with something smaller. Not the whole house, but maybe a down payment, 20, 30,000. The negotiation tactics were pathetic. Start high, get rejected, come back with a smaller demand, and hope it seems reasonable by comparison. Ryan, where's Sarah? His face tightened. She didn't want me to meet with you. Said it showed weakness. What do you think? I think I'm drowning, Dad. The words came out strangled. Our credit cards are maxed. The car payment's 3 months behind. The legal fees alone are killing us. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Tell me about your financial situation, son. Why are you? He stopped, seeing the phone. Are you recording me? Yes. For my protection. Ryan stared at the device, then seemed to deflate completely. We owe $47,000 on credit cards. The BMW lease is $1,200 a month. I lied about the payment. Sarah's spending is. It's out of control, but I can't seem to stop her. The admissions poured out like water from a broken pipe. The Vegas trip had cost $8,000 they didn't have. Sarah's shopping addiction had emptied their savings twice in the past year. They'd borrowed money from 6 different people with lies about temporary hardships. We never thought you'd fight the lawsuit, Ryan said, his voice hollow. Our lawyer said most elderly people settle rather than go through the stress of court. Your lawyer was wrong. Dad, The discovery process, they want our complete financial records, social media accounts, everything. When people see what we actually spend versus what we claimed, he buried his face in his hands. We're going to be completely exposed. The boy who'd once helped me fix leaky faucets was admitting to systematic fraud and manipulation. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger anymore, but a kind of clinical detachment. Ryan, did you really think I'd made promises to pay for your house? Long pause. Sarah said you did. She said, when you talked about family helping family, you were making commitments. And what do you think now? I think. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I think I've been an idiot. I think I let my wife convince me to destroy my relationship with my father for money we never deserved. The admission should have moved me. A month ago, it might have. Now it just sounded like another manipulation attempt. What do you want from me, Ryan? I want to take it all back. The lawsuit, the things we said about you, the whole mess. Can we just forget this ever happened? I stood up from the bench, looking down at my son. No, Ryan, we can't. But, Dad, the lawsuit changed everything. You accused me in court documents of cognitive decline, breach of contract, elder abuse. You tried to steal my retirement savings through legal fraud. His face crumpled. I was desperate. So was I, Ryan. Desperate to understand how I raised a son who could do this to his own father. I walked away, leaving him on the bench where I'd once taught him to be honest, to work hard, to treat people with respect. All lessons he'd apparently forgotten. Driving home, I felt empty rather than victorious. The scared young man in the park bore little resemblance to the confident boy I'd raised. But it wasn't my job to rescue him from consequences he'd earned. Pulling into my driveway, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Sarah sat behind the wheel, watching my house with the intensity of a predator. Our eyes met through her windshield, and the hatred in her stare was pure and undiluted. I went inside and called Elizabeth Morrison to report the surveillance. 2 days after Sarah's surveillance, I received the court notice. The hearing was set for Thursday morning. Judge Patricia Henley presiding. I spent Monday organizing my evidence files one final time. Every screenshot, every recorded conversation, every piece of financial documentation was labeled, indexed, and ready for presentation. Elizabeth had been amazed by the thoroughness of my preparation. Paul, in 30 years of practice, I've never seen a plaintiff with better documentation. They walked into a trap of their own making. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, matching the seriousness of what lay ahead. I dressed in my best suit, the one I'd worn to Ryan's college graduation, and arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. Ryan and Sarah were already there, huddled with their attorney near the metal detectors. Sarah wore an expensive black dress that probably cost more than some people made in a week. Ryan's suit looked new and tailored. They were still playing the part of successful young professionals even as their financial world collapsed around them. Their lawyer, James Brennan, was a slick-looking man in his 40s with perfectly styled hair and an expensive briefcase. He'd built his reputation on these family financial disputes, convincing elderly parents to settle rather than face public embarrassment. He was about to learn that not all elderly parents were easily intimidated. Mr. Forrest. Judge Henley called the courtroom to order with crisp efficiency. She was a stern woman in her 50s, known for having little patience with frivolous lawsuits. Brennan stood to present Ryan and Sarah's case. His voice was smooth, practiced, designed to evoke sympathy for his young clients who had been betrayed by broken family promises. Your Honor, my clients have documented evidence of repeated verbal commitments from the defendant to assist with major family purchases. Mr. Ryan Forrest will testify that his father explicitly promised to help with their first home purchase, creating reasonable expectations of support. Ryan took the stand, his voice shaky as he recounted conversations that had never happened. According to his testimony, I'd made specific promises at family dinners, birthday celebrations, and holiday gatherings to make sure they got their dream house. It was complete fiction, and I watched the judge's expression grow skeptical as Ryan stumbled through his rehearsed lies. Sarah's testimony was worse. She sobbed dramatically about their broken dreams and elderly betrayal, claiming I'd encouraged them to look at expensive houses because I committed to helping with the purchase. Mr. Forrest told us repeatedly that family takes care of family, she said through fake tears. He said our happiness was his priority and that he had more money than he could ever spend. Judge Henley's expression remained neutral, but I caught her making notes during the most emotional portions of Sarah's performance. Then it was Elizabeth's turn. Your Honor, the defendants have prepared a comprehensive response to these allegations supported by extensive documentation. I took the stand and calmly recounted the actual events. No dramatic emotions, no theatrical gestures, just facts, dates, and recorded conversations. Elizabeth presented our evidence systematically. Ryan's social media posts showing luxury spending while claiming poverty. Credit card statements revealing their true financial situation. Recorded phone calls where they admitted their manipulative strategies. The courtroom was dead silent as my recording of Ryan played. We never thought you'd fight the lawsuit. Our lawyer said most elderly people settle rather than go through the stress of court. Brennan objected repeatedly, but the recordings were legal and the evidence was devastating. The financial timeline was particularly damning. While claiming they couldn't afford groceries, Ryan and Sarah had spent $43,000 on luxury purchases in the past year. Judge Henley reviewed the evidence with growing incredulity. When Elizabeth finished the presentation, the judge leaned forward and asked the question that ended everything. Mr. Brennan, where's the written documentation of this alleged promise, any contract, any written agreement, any documented proof that your client was guaranteed $400,000? Brennan stammered. Your Honor, many family agreements are verbal. I'm not asking about family agreements. I'm asking about written proof of a specific promise to provide $400,000 for a house purchase. Silence. There is none, Your Honor. Judge Henley's expression hardened. So, you're asking this court to order an elderly man to pay $400,000 based entirely on the testimony of two people who, according to the evidence presented, have systematically lied about their financial situation, manipulated family members, and attempted to defraud their own father. The courtroom was electric with tension. Ryan and Sarah looked like deer caught in headlights. Your Honor, I request a brief recess to consult with my clients. Granted, 15 minutes. As the judge left the bench, Elizabeth leaned over to whisper in my ear, "We've won, Paul, completely." But I wasn't watching my lawyer's celebration. I was watching Ryan's complete breakdown as reality finally hit him. Judge Henley returned to the bench with an expression that could have frozen fire. Ryan and Sarah sat rigid in their seats, their expensive clothes now seeming like costumes in a play that had gone horribly wrong. I've reviewed all evidence presented in this case. Judge Henley began, her voice carrying the weight of final judgment. This court finds the plaintiff's claims to be not only without merit, but actively fraudulent. Ryan's face went white. Sarah gripped the table so hard her knuckles showed through her skin. The evidence presented by the defendant demonstrates a clear pattern of financial manipulation, deliberate misrepresentation, and attempted fraud. The plaintiffs have provided no credible evidence of any promise, written or verbal, to provide $400,000 for a home purchase. The judge's voice grew sharper. Furthermore, the evidence shows that the plaintiffs maintained expensive lifestyles while claiming poverty, borrowed money from multiple sources under false pretenses, and systematically attempted to manipulate elderly family members for financial gain. I sat perfectly still, feeling a deep satisfaction as justice unfolded exactly as it should. The plaintiff's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. The defendant's counterclaims for defamation, harassment, and abuse of process are granted in full. Brennan tried to speak. Your Honor, if we could. I'm not finished, Counselor. Judge Henley's tone could have cut steel. The court awards the defendant full reimbursement of legal fees in the amount of $28,300 plus court costs and punitive damages of $15,000 for the emotional distress caused by this frivolous action. Ryan made a choking sound. $43,000 they didn't have on top of their existing legal fees. Additionally, the judge continued, this court is referring this case to the state attorney's office for investigation of potential perjury charges. Lying under oath is a felony, and this court does not tolerate fraud. Sarah burst into tears. Real ones this time, not the manufactured emotion she had displayed earlier. Ryan sat motionless, staring straight ahead like a man watching his life collapse in real time. Finally, the court issues a restraining order prohibiting the plaintiffs from contacting the defendant directly or through third parties, from approaching his residence, and from making any further public statements about this matter. Judge Henley looked directly at Ryan and Sarah. You attempted to use this court system to steal from your own family member. You have disgraced yourselves, wasted taxpayer resources, and committed perjury in my courtroom. I hope the consequences serve as a lesson about the difference between legal action and legalized theft. The gavel came down with finality. In the hallway outside the courtroom, reporters had gathered. Word of the dramatic case had spread through the community. Ryan and Sarah hurried past them with their heads down, but several people I recognized from town were waiting to talk to me. Mr. Forrest, how do you feel about the verdict? Asked Jenny from the local newspaper. I thought carefully before answering. I feel that justice was served today. Family relationships should be built on love and respect, not financial manipulation. I hope this sends a message that elderly people won't be intimidated by threats or lawsuits from people who want something for nothing. Mrs. Peterson from down the street approached me with tears in her eyes. Paul, I'm so sorry. I believe their lies. I should have known better. No harm done, Helen. People were given incomplete information. Ryan appeared suddenly beside me, his face desperate. Dad, please, can we talk? I know I made mistakes. I looked at my son, this stranger, wearing Ryan's face, and felt nothing but tired sadness. You heard the judge, Ryan. There's a restraining order. Don't violate it. I walked past him without another word, Elizabeth at my side, and stepped into the bright sunshine outside the courthouse. Behind me, I could hear Sarah's voice rising in fury. This isn't over. We'll appeal. We'll. Brennan's sharp response cut her off. You'll do nothing. You're lucky you're not being arrested right now. I drove home slowly, taking the long route past the house Ryan and Sarah could no longer afford. A bright red for sale sign had appeared in the front yard, probably posted that morning after the hearing. I didn't slow down, but I allowed myself a small smile. Justice served. My driveway had never felt more welcoming. I sat in my car for several minutes watching my house, my sanctuary that Ryan and Sarah had tried to take from me through legal theft. The afternoon sun made the windows glow golden, and everything felt peaceful in a way it hadn't for months. My phone buzzed constantly with congratulatory messages. The courthouse victory had spread through Mano faster than news of a lottery winner. Sarah from the diner. Paul, so proud of how you handled this. Takes real courage to stand up for what's right. Tom Murphy, coffee's on the house for life. You showed this town what integrity looks like. Father McKenna, justice served with dignity. Your parents would be proud. By evening, I'd received over 40 messages from friends, neighbors, and even strangers who'd heard about the case. The community that Ryan and Sarah had briefly turned against me was now firmly in my corner, and they were angry at being manipulated. Mrs. Chin stopped by with a casserole. Paul, I felt so foolish for believing their story, but watching you handle this with such class, you're an inspiration. The long-term consequences for Ryan and Sarah became clear over the following weeks. Their house went into foreclosure within days of the court judgment. The BMW was repossessed. Their social media accounts disappeared entirely, probably to avoid the comments from people who now knew the truth. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned they'd moved in with Sarah's parents in North Dakota, completely humiliated and financially destroyed. Ryan had lost his job. His employer didn't appreciate the negative publicity from the perjury investigation, the legal fees, court-ordered damages, and complete destruction of their credit meant they'd be recovering from this disaster for years. They'd gambled everything on intimidating an old man and lost spectacularly. Did I feel guilty about Ryan's consequences? Not for a moment. Every misfortune that befell them was the direct result of choices they'd made. I hadn't destroyed their finances. I'd simply refused to bail them out of their own irresponsibility. The broader lessons of the experience settled into my consciousness like sediment after a storm. Truth really does triumph over manipulation, but only if you're willing to fight for it. Dignity and principle are worth defending even when the cost seems high. Family loyalty must be earned through respect and reciprocated. It can't be demanded through guilt or threats. Most importantly, I'd learned that saying no to family members who want to exploit you isn't cruelty. It's necessary boundary setting that protects everyone involved. My life moved forward with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The stress of wondering when Ryan would make his next financial demand was gone permanently. The community respect I'd earned through this ordeal was deeper than anything I'd experienced before. New friendships formed with people who'd watch me handle the situation with integrity. My church asked me to speak to their senior group about protecting themselves from financial manipulation. The local newspaper wrote an editorial about my case, calling it a textbook example of how truth and patience triumph over lies and greed. 3 months after the court victory, I was working in my garden when Elizabeth Morrison called with news. Paul, Ryan and Sarah's lawyer, has been sanctioned by the state bar for knowingly filing a frivolous lawsuit, and the district attorney has decided to prosecute them for perjury. I continued planting tomato seedlings as she spoke. The earth was rich and dark, perfect for growing healthy things while removing harmful weeds. What's the likely outcome? Probation, community service, and permanent criminal records. Nothing that will send them to jail, but enough to ensure everyone knows what they attempted to do. After hanging up, I sat back on my heels, surveying the neat rows of plants that would feed me through the summer and into fall. The garden was a perfect metaphor for life. Nurture what's healthy, remove what's harmful, and trust that good things will grow from patient effort. Ryan had been like a weed in my garden, choking out peace and draining resources meant for healthy growth. Removing him had been painful, but necessary. My phone rang. Another friend calling to check on me, invite me to dinner, or just share conversation. The community that had briefly shunned me now embraced me more warmly than ever. I was finally free to be the man I'd always been. Honest, hardworking, generous with people who deserved it, and absolutely unwilling to reward greed or manipulation. The sun was setting over my garden, painting everything in golden light. Tomorrow I'd plant the second row of vegetables, tend the flowers, and continue building the peaceful life I'd earned through a lifetime of honest work. Justice served, family protected, truth victorious. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought with the people closest to you. But sometimes those battles are exactly what's needed to protect everything that matters. I was at peace. If you like the story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.